Hello, Catherine here. As you probably know, this coming Sunday, the 9th of November, is Remembrance Sunday. And this year marks 80 years since the end of the Second World War. So we thought we would do a small feature on this day and its traditions. Now, Remembrance Sunday is always on the second Sunday in November, and Armistice Day is always on the 11th of November, because that was the actual day that the armistice was signed and the war in Europe was over. And a 2-minute silence is held on both of these days. So this year, Remembrance Sunday is on the 9th of November, and Armistice Day is on Tuesday, the 11th of November. And much of the information that I'm going to tell you about has come from the Royal British Legion website. And Remembrance Sunday is a national opportunity to remember the service and sacrifice of all those that have defended our freedoms and protected our way of life. We remember the armed forces and their families, from Britain and the Commonwealth, the vital role played by the emergency services and those who have lost their lives as a result of conflict or terrorism. So little information about the Royal British Legion. And the Royal British Legion has been supporting servicemen and women, ex-serving personnel and their families since 1921. It was formed in May 1921, bringing together 4 national organisations of ex-servicemen that had established themselves after the First World War. And that was the National Association of Discharged Sailors and Soldiers, the British National Federation of Discharged and Demobilised Sailors and Soldiers, the Comrades of the Great War, and the Officers Association. And the amalgamation of these diverse bodies can be attributed largely to 2 men, Field Marshal Earl Haig and Tom Lister of the Federation of Discharged and Demobilised Sailors and Soldiers. And Lord Haig served as the President of the Royal British Legion until his death. And by 1921, the tradition of a 2-minute silence had already been established. And the first ever poppy appeal was also held in that year in 1921. The poppies sold out almost immediately and raised over £106,000, which was obviously a considerable amount at the time. And the money was used to help World War I veterans with employment and housing. As a result of the First World War, Britain's economy plummeted, and in 1921 there were 2 million people unemployed. And over 6 million men had served in the war, and of those who came back, 1.75 million had suffered some kind of disability, and half of those were permanently disabled. And then there were those who had depended on those who had gone to war, wives and children, widows, orphans, as well as the parents who had lost sons in the war and on whom they were often financially dependent. And the Royal British Legion was established to care for those who had suffered as the result of service during the First World War. And they've been helping the armed forces community and their families ever since. So the poppy appeal is obviously a key part of the work of the Royal British Legion. So what about the poppy? The red poppy is a symbol of both remembrance and hope for a peaceful future. And poppies are worn as a show of support for the armed forces community. It's a well-known and well-established symbol, and one that carries a wealth of history and meaning with it. Wearing a poppy is still always a very personal choice, and it reflects individual experiences and personal memories. And it's never compulsory, but it is appreciated by those who it is intended to support. And obviously these days there are also other coloured poppies that represent different groups and different people to be remembered. So what is the inspiration, the history behind the poppy becoming a symbol of remembrance? Well, it all started with the Western Front. And during World War I, much of the fighting took place in Western Europe. The countryside was blasted, it was bombed, it was fought over repeatedly. And previously beautiful landscapes had just turned to mud, pretty bleak and barren scenes where little or nothing would grow. Except there was a notable and striking exception to this bleakness, the bright red Flanders poppies. These resilient flowers flourished in the middle of so much chaos and destruction, growing upon thousands. And in the spring of 1915, shortly after losing a friend at Ypres, a Canadian doctor, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, was moved by the sight of these poppies, and that inspiration led him to write the now famous poem, In Flanders Fields. And you can hear the poem in full in our poetry section this week. And the spread of the poppy as a symbol, well, the poem then inspired an American academic named Moyna Michael to adopt the poppy in memory of those who had fallen in the war. And she campaigned to get it adopted as an official symbol of remembrance across the United States and worked with others who were trying to do the same in Canada, Australia and in the UK. And also involved with those efforts was a French woman, Anna Guérin, who was in the UK in 1921, where she planned to sell the poppies in London. And she met Earl Haig, the founder of the Royal British Legion, and he was persuaded to adopt the poppy as the emblem in the UK. And the Royal British Legion ordered 9 million poppies that year and sold them out on the 11th of November that year. So they sold out almost immediately. And that first poppy appeal, as you said, raised £106,000 to help veterans with housing and jobs. And today's poppy appeal, 40,000 volunteers distribute 40 million poppies. And this year we'll be marking the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And the Royal British Legion has a very special commemoration. They'll be bringing thousands of messages together in their collective field of remembrance at the National Memorial Arboretum. So a little bit about the National Memorial Arboretum. It's the nation's year-round place to remember. It's an inspirational living landscape that celebrates lives lived and commemorates lives lost. It's a beautiful and inspiring place. 150 acres of the Arboretum form a living landscape, a home to more than 400 memorials. And it's a poignant place to pause, reflect and thank those who gave everything for their country. And so therefore it's a perfect backdrop for this year's Field of Remembrance. The Arboretum is on the edge of the National Forest in Staffordshire near Ulruos, which is between Burton-on-Trent and Lichfield. And it is part of the Royal British Legion, but it's a separate legal body and charity in its own right. It was developed on reclaimed gravel workings, and it's bordered by the rivers Trent and Tame, and it was gifted to the charity by Redland Aggregates, which is now Tarmac. And the Arboretum was the idea of Commander David Childs, CBE, who, having been inspired by a visit to Arlington Cemetery and the National Arboretum in Washington, believed a year-round National Centre for Remembrance was needed here in the UK to ensure that we never forget. And he was supported by Group Captain Leonard Cheshire VC, and an appeal was launched in 1994 by the then Prime Minister John Major. And the project began with no money, no land, no staff, no trees, but the National Lottery, in the form of the Millennium Commission, granted 40% of the funds needed. And this was matched by thousands of donations, large and small, from a wide variety of organisations, both military and civilian, men and women, corporate and voluntary. And so planting began in 1996, and the Arboretum was created by a small army of volunteers and an original friends group, with the vital support and grants from the Forestry Commission and the National Forest Company. The Arboretum welcomes over 300,000 visitors to its site each year, including over 20,000 young people for formal and informal learning visits. And visitors can enjoy discovering the 400 memorials nestled among some 25,000 trees, experience riverside walks and participate in a wide variety of daily activities like guided walks, land train tours, memorial talks, exhibitions and buggy tours. And each year around 250 events take place on site, from small intimate services of remembrance to set pieces like Armistice Day, Remembrance Sunday and Armed Forces Day. So a little bit about Remembrance Sunday now. So the Cenotaph Parade is a march past of 10,000 veterans and eligible participants that takes place every year on Remembrance Sunday, following the National Act of Remembrance, which is led by His Majesty the King. The parade forms up in columns, initially on Horse Guards Parade, before moving through Horse Guards Arch to form on Whitehall, in time for His Majesty the King to arrive at the Cenotaph. The march past parades down Whitehall, passes the Cenotaph, before turning right on Great George Street and right again on Horse Guards Road, where the salute is taken by a member of the royal family. All columns are then reformed on Horse Guards Parade, followed by which the national anthem is played, and then the parade is dismissed. And the National Service of Remembrance, which is held at the Cenotaph in Whitehall, provides the nation with a physical reminder of all those who have served and sacrificed, with British and Commonwealth soldiers, sailors, airmen and women represented, together with members of the emergency services and civilians, ensuring that no one is forgotten. Members of the royal family will pay tribute alongside members of the cabinet, opposition party leaders, former prime ministers, as well as the Mayor of London and other ministers. And representatives of the armed forces, fishing fleets and merchant, air and navy will be there, as well as faith communities and high commissioners of Commonwealth countries. There's a maximum number of 10,000 veterans that can march, and first-generation relatives can march on behalf of a deceased veteran, so either a partner or a child, but not grandchildren, because that would open up just too many participants. And the veterans wear smart civilian clothing and full-size medals, and decorations or ribbons if appropriate. So it's a veterans march past, and so those participating do not wear service uniform. Medals and berets are worn in keeping with policy and tradition. And if you're wearing your own medals, they're on the left-hand side of your chest. And if you're wearing a relative's medals, they should be worn on the right-hand side. But of course, the London Remembrance event is not the only one held. And there are many other Remembrance events held across the UK that the Royal British Legion helps to support. They encourage local and regional communities to produce remembrance commemorations of their own. And at the core of all of these events is the act of remembrance. And so the act of remembrance is brief and it's non-religious, and it makes it exceptionally well suited to personalised commemorations. And people can assemble whatever readings or music or other elements that they want to accompany the act of remembrance in order to make their own ceremony relevant to that particular community. So the British Legion doesn't prescribe what can be included, although the act of remembrance itself always consists of the following. So the exhortation is recited. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. And that is an extract from a poem written by Robert Lawrence Binyon called For the Fallen, which was composed in September 1914, just a few weeks after the outbreak of the First World War. And then after that, the last post is sounded. And in Scotland, sometimes a piper's lament is also included. And then there is the 2-minute silence, which is observed. And then the Reveille is sounded at the end of the 2-minute silence. And then there can also be then the Kohima epitaph, which can also be recited. And that is, when you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today. And the Kohima epitaph is an epitaph that's engraved on the memorial of the 2nd British Division in the cemetery of Kohima, which is in northeast India. And the verse is attributed to John Maxwell Edmonds, 1875 to 1958, and it's thought to have been inspired by an epitaph written many years ago in ancient Greece to one of the Greeks who fell at the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC. And I think you'll agree that it's a very fitting epitaph to be recited during an act of remembrance. So, however you choose to remember, I do hope this feature gave you some interesting information to reflect on.